So I would say kind of on this note, right, we're all mentioning, the action happening, the big moments today, what we're creating right now. I'll slightly pivot that to, I think, the recent big news of our new FCC maps. I'm sure we all had a chance to peek at them and see what's going on and what's developed. But I'd love to hear thoughts, what you guys took away, what you think the strengths were, what the weaknesses were, what the impact might be.
Well, I can jump in there. I'd love to hear what other people have to say, especially Utopia and some of the others. I mean, we're working on unserved and underserved. We bought a speed test or licensed a speed testing system last year just so that we could counter the FCC 477 data with our grantees. We know exactly what the truth is. And it was so disappointing on November 18th. I guess I sort of pulled it up a couple of days later because we're in a big application mode for an RFP, is that I expected better. And it was still where it was, claiming the connectivity that rural, remote, unconnected Idaho has. I mean, he's basically saying 85 to 100% of our state. So the difficulty of that is also the process to challenge that in an under-resourced state. So it is heavily set up to not help or allow access to the 42 billion. And I'm just enormously disappointed at the heavy lift we have ahead. It is going to require a lot of us to pull together to get those challenges in. I don't think it's realistic on how they've set up the time frame for the response to the challenges, because I think there are going to be gazillions of them, and they are not set up to do that. And so I wish it had been a much simpler process that wasn't set up the way it is. And I'd love to hear what other people are doing, or if there is a secret plan hatched out there somewhere to counter this.
I think guys, like I said this probably right before the maps came out. Some reporter called me about something, and we were talking, and she said, well, everybody's now calling me and saying in rural areas, well, these maps are going to be wrong because we're servicing these areas. And I said, it's really funny when the rubber hits the road that all of those rural areas are now served, because they weren't served 2 years ago. But now that when those territories are being threatened by competition, now you're seeing, oh, no, we don't need the money anymore. So I think you look at the maps and it looks like everything is served. It looks like everything has connectivity, and it was an FCC misstep to let advertised speeds be put on the maps. I mean, everybody agrees with that. We don't know how they would have solved it. I am not only the work at Utopia Fiber, I also am one of the board directors for the American Association for Public Broadband. And it's going to be a huge concern about how communities around this country challenge these maps with the limited resources that are out there. And do a lot of communities even know that these maps exist right now and they should be looking at them? I mean, I think that's even the first problem of what do we do with them? Like, where do we go?
And the challenge window is very short. January 13th. I mean, it is obnoxious when we are trying, and it's done right in the time when every state is putting together their broadband planning. They are, understaffed and, under-resourced, trying to put all this work together to get this work done. And then there's a funding flow that's supposed to be going out the door at the same time. This is something that should have been done years ago and settled years ago, and it wasn't. And now it's a big train wreck for everyone. Because I think you're right. I mean, we haven't even begun to address it because we have so many things that we're dealing with today. But we're going to be talking about it this week to figure out how we're going to come up with our challenge. Because the big thing is, here's the problem. It's saying everybody's served, right? So the money's for unserved and underserved. So if it's an impossible task to prove that you're unserved or underserved, and your data and speed testing analysis is like number 3 on the list, and the other 2 tasks are impossible. It's like every household must call and see if they have service, and if they don't, prove that you were denied service at a speed or a reasonable rate that you must, I mean, it just goes on and on. I mean, that's like That's ridiculous. So the whole thing is, how are you going to get any of this done? So no one qualifies for the funding right now. No one who needs it.
Well, there's like a pocket this big around somewhere in the country that needs it.
Yeah.
And it's like 200 homes.
Yeah.
Pretty, yeah. No, I mean, my background is working with municipalities and consulting, right? So I did almost 8 years of consulting with local governments and co-ops, and the amount of, broadband need that we saw over the years certainly could not have been, that gap has not been filled, like you said, Kim, in the last 2 years. Yes, large improvements have been made in many areas, but it is unfathomable to think that the government would put out $42 billion when they didn't think it was needed, but then they put out maps that essentially said the funding's not needed. So the conversation is illogical at that point. So where do you go from there?
Yeah, and I would just add that, like, we were really concerned at Kansas that, like, it was kind of a mission accomplished scenario. When you look at the maps, what policymakers are going to look at the maps as they are presented. They're not going to toggle all of these different layers. And the maps as presented have satellite, fixed wireless, all of these technologies and speeds that don't even align with the new infrastructure and treasury under ARPA CPF guidelines of what broadband is, right? And so we're really struggling with that. And I think it was Kim or Christina who really touched on the lack of capacity in broadband offices to challenge this. And so we were an office of 2 when the challenge process was underway. And we were one of the first states to get CPF funding. So we're moving through the CPF process evaluation, which our CPF for infrastructure program was 700% oversubscribed. So we're doing that. We're curing our federal grants for digital equity, BEAD, and middle mile. I'm trying to staff up an office, and then, these maps come out, and something had to give, right? And I'm already working 60 to 70 hours a week. What are we going to do? These maps, I want to commend Congress for trying to produce more accurate, more granular data. I don't want to pretend like these maps are not more granular. Okay, they're not census block data. It's better than it was. But these are high stakes for states like Kansas that have a lot of rurality. They're not accurate. And they say Kansas is pretty much served. And we have hundreds of millions of dollars on the line if we don't have accuracy, and states don't have the capacity to robustly challenge. And so it's a real problem. And I don't really know how to fix it.
The problem is too, Jade, is that you're having this industry that is craving for anybody who has any knowledge of broadband, and they're throwing money like crazy at anybody who understands broadband. So broadband offices, I'm a government employee, I get it, that they're not paying what the private sector is paying in this field. So to get people who are going to work the hours that are needed to obtain the data and drive the results that they want to be seen is very, very hard with what is happening. I've seen some of these broadband offices who just put out the listing this month of looking for a broadband director, and I'm like, oh.
I know, we're dropping like flies. Oklahoma is offering $205 grand a year, and they can't get anybody to take it. And Indiana, Jody, she left, and she was amazing. Jeff in Arizona left, he was amazing. It's an impossible job if you don't provide the resources necessary to do it. This is important. Like I say, it's I hate to keep saying legacy, but this is legacy work. We are doing our generation's infrastructure work. But
just imagine, I don't mean to interrupt, but just imagine if you had I mean, I'm not about bureaucracies. Our goal is to be out of business. It was 3 years, but now it looks like it's going to have to be 5, which is a bummer because we have to raise more private philanthropy to cover that. But just think about 42 billion, let alone the annual RDOF and reconnects budgets and all these billions of dollars that flow every year for this. And this is a short-staffed shop nationally.
Mhm.
It's unconscionable to not have, and I think that it's just, it's knitted together. I mean, here we are a network of women who are coming together, who are leading on this kind of thing. But the fact that it is not well staffed to deploy billions of dollars is mind-boggling.
Christina, you touched on it. Like, I had this interview 2 days ago and they wanted to talk about mapping and like all this stuff. And I'm like, you don't get it. Like, the single most important barrier to success in universal accessibility is the fact that state broadband offices have no capacity to do the work.
That's right. And maybe the joke is on all of us, and the incumbents are holding back because they're, huge staffs, right? And so, maybe the legacy ISPs are, that are staffed. I mean, I know they're going, they're applying for these grants and they're working really hard at going for it, but it's sort of lopsided, right? I mean,
But I mean, I don't know how other states are handling it, but like in Kansas, local consult and engagement in the community is a big piece. Like, we don't want a bunch of carpetbaggers swooping
Well, that's
in
right.
to get grant funding.
We've had counties. So we have a county that's probably bigger than the size of Rhode Island. It has 1,000 residents, 1,100 residents, and we're looking to connect 481 households for the entire county. That's everybody. That would get us everybody. And we had no one interested in connecting, even when we had lines of fiber running through the county. None of them would even node or drop or do anything off of that to connect this community of 300. And then all of a sudden, we just got a phone call 3 days before the deadline of ISPs who said they would not serve, had no plans to serve. And now they said, oh, we're in. And I said, we haven't been to any of the stakeholder meetings. Where are you with meeting with the county commission? You haven't been part of any of the process. And now, process is just process for process sake, but there's a reason why you have it, is because you want full coverage, you want affordability. And again, like you said, it's not even, I mean, maybe the process is, you don't have to be considerate of who your customer is, but these folks are, not even part of a competitive process yet.
And I think that's where Ashley and probably I would align on this, is if you bring competition in, the customer wins. But you have to understand it's also a business relationship. And I get that we want to serve. I get that we want to connect everybody in a community, but you have to think a lot of these people are private companies and they have to look at their bottom line as well. And it's not altruistic all the time. And that's why I say every time I speak, if you want to connect a community, it has to be municipally owned, because nobody else is going to look and connect every person in a community besides a government-owned entity. Some maybe will in certain demographics, but in some of those like 1,000 to 300 home communities where you have drops that are 2 miles off the road, it's not, a private company is not going to spend their capital to build there without a huge amount of returns. And I mean, I don't blame them for that. And that's why these government funds are there, because it doesn't make business sense. And I think that's where we have to separate of private businesses versus where government comes into play on these whole things.
Well, yeah. And what piece does the government take? I mean, what part do they own, Kim? We could go into business models in detail, right? But I mean, I think what Christina is saying is correct, that the local governments need to have a seat at the table, whether they end up being infrastructure owners, full ISPs, or just really support in driving, the right companies to serve their communities. And whether that takes, aggregating demand through multiple communities, right? We may have to look at regional plays, but I'm really interested, Megan, in your take on this. If the maps say, you have the funding background probably greater than all of us from a a larger perspective across the country, if the maps come out and they say 85% of states like Idaho and Kansas, whom we know are underserved, are served, and they have large dollars to deliver, who gets them? Where do they go? Is there excess money? What are the predictions on that conundrum?